today's episode, we break down the infamous incident when 100 Sherpas turned on one climber at Camp 2. The breaking point came after a single decision that crossed a line the Sherpas could not ignore or walk away from. What followed escalated faster than anyone had ever expected. It was May 15th, 2016, and the morning air at Camp 2 on Mount Everest's western CWM held the sharp bite of -15 degrees Fahrenheit. The camp sat just over 21,200 feet on the broad glacial valley between the towering walls of Nuptse to the west and Lhotse to the east. Tents dotted the uneven ice in clusters organized by expedition companies, their bright fabrics creating patches of color against the monochrome landscape. Prayer flags strung between camps snapped in the wind, carrying mantras across the thin air. Among the climbers staged at Camp 2 was Derek Holden, a 38-year-old from Vancouver, British Columbia. Derek had made his fortune in commercial real estate development, selling a portfolio of properties 3 years earlier for an amount he described as substantial to anyone who asked. The sale had funded what he called his transformation, a shift from corporate life to adventure pursuits that could be documented and shared. He had taken up mountaineering 18 months before arriving at Everest, completing guided ascents of Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, and Aconcagua. His Instagram following had grown from 300 to nearly 12,000 during that period, built on aspirational content that positioned him as someone pursuing authentic experiences at the edges of human capability. Derek's approach to climbing emphasized personal narrative over technical development. He trained in a gym near his home but had limited experience with actual mountaineering skills. His ascents had been guided trips where logistics were managed entirely by support staff, allowing him to focus on the physical effort and the content creation that documented it. Everest represented the culmination of that narrative. Derek had paid more than $70,000 to join a commercial expedition, operated by a mid-tier guiding company based in Kathmandu. The fee covered permits, Sherpa support, oxygen supplies, and logistics from base camp to the summit and back. His social media content from the expedition had been consistent, daily posts framing his presence on Everest as evidence of mental toughness and commitment. Above Camp 2, the Lhotse face reared up in a continuous blue ice wall. Teams of Sherpas had been working on that face for 2 weeks, installing the ropes that would carry hundreds of climbers toward the summit during the narrow weather windows of late May. The work required spending hours in exposed positions, drilling ice screws into surfaces that could fracture without warning, testing each anchor under body weight, before trusting it with the loads it would bear. The climbing season was entering its critical phase. Weather forecasts predicted a stable high-pressure system would arrive within days, opening the first legitimate summit window. Expedition leaders were finalizing rotation schedules. Oxygen caches were being positioned at higher camps, and the tension of accumulated preparation was becoming tangible across the mountain. What Derek's post did not include were the Sherpas who made his ascent possible. When they appeared in his photos, carrying his equipment, preparing his meals, setting up his tent, they were rarely identified by name. On the occasions when he did mention them, it was in passing references to my Sherpa or the porters, language that reduced individuals to functional roles. This pattern had been noted by other climbers at base camp, but in an environment where dozens of expeditions operated independently, such behavior rarely prompted direct confrontation. Derek's relationship with his assigned Sherpa support team had been deteriorating since the expedition began. His lead Sherpa was Dorje Tamang, 34, a veteran of 11 Everest summits who had worked in high-altitude guiding for 15 years. Dorje had been raised in the Khumbu Valley, learned mountaineering from his father, and supported his extended family with income earned during the climbing season. He was known among expedition companies as reliable, patient, and skilled at managing the personality types that high-altitude mountaineering attracted: the insecure, the arrogant, the terrified, the overconfident. The first significant incident occurred during the initial acclimatization rotation to Camp 1 at 19,900 feet. Derek had insisted on filming inside the Khumbu icefall, despite being told repeatedly that many Sherpas considered the icefall a sacred space where cameras were inappropriate. The icefall was where most Sherpa deaths occurred on Everest, a constantly shifting maze of ice blocks and crevasses that had to be crossed multiple times during each expedition. Sherpas had lost friends, brothers, and fathers in that section, and the cultural practice was to move through it quickly and respectfully, without treating it as a backdrop for content creation. When Dorje explained this during a rest stop between the ladder crossings, Derek responded that he had paid for full access and would document whatever he chose. He continued filming, capturing footage of Sherpas moving loads through the most dangerous sections of the icefall. That footage later appeared in a video post describing the chaos and disorganization he had observed, with no mention of the cultural context Dorje had tried to explain. The post received hundreds of comments praising Derek's bravery and thanking him for showing the reality of Everest. None of the commenters knew they were watching footage that had violated protocols Dorje had explicitly outlined. The second incident occurred at Camp 2 during a rest day. Derek had been editing photos on his laptop inside the mess tent when Dorje entered to discuss the next day's plan. Without looking up, Derek asked Dorje to bring him coffee. The request itself was not unusual. Sherpas regularly prepared food and beverages for clients as part of expedition logistics. But the manner was dismissive, delivered as an order rather than a request, and several other Sherpas in the tent had witnessed the exchange. The tone carried implications about hierarchy and value that extended beyond the immediate interaction. Dorje prepared the coffee without comment, but the incident circulated through the Sherpa community at base camp within hours, adding to a growing file of observations about Derek's behavior. The third incident involved a social media post that reached Sherpas through clients who followed Derek's account. He had uploaded a photo of himself at Camp 2 with the Lhotse face visible behind him, captioned with text describing his progress as a personal achievement built through months of training and mental preparation. The post made no reference to the Sherpas who had carried 70% of his equipment to that altitude, established the camp infrastructure, or fixed the ropes visible in the background of his photo. Climbers who knew Dorje's team later said this post caused significant anger, not because it omitted credit, but because it actively erased their labor from a narrative that depended entirely on their work. By early May, Derek's behavior had become a topic of conversation among Sherpa teams across multiple expeditions. The Sherpa community on Everest operated as an interconnected network where information traveled quickly and reputations were tracked across seasons. Guides who worked for competing companies often trained together, shared equipment, and coordinated rescue efforts. Within that network, Derek was developing a reputation as someone who demonstrated consistent disrespect, not through single dramatic acts, but through accumulated patterns of behavior that revealed how he understood his relationship to the people supporting his climb. The triggering event occurred on the morning of May 15th. Derek had climbed to approximately 23,000 feet on the Lhotse face the previous day as part of his final acclimatization rotation before the summit push. The climb had been exhausting. 3 hours of front pointing up ice while clipped to fixed ropes, pausing every few steps to gasp for breath in air that held barely 40% of sea level oxygen. He descended back to Camp 2 in the early afternoon, exhausted but satisfied with his progress. His legs trembled from the effort, and his fingers were numb despite insulated gloves. That evening, after warming himself in his sleeping bag and forcing down a freeze-dried meal, he posted a photo of himself on the fixed ropes with a caption describing the technical difficulty of the climbing and his growing confidence in his abilities. The post included a sentence stating that he had installed sections of rope himself to ensure proper placement after observing questionable anchors on the lower face. This statement was false. Derek had not installed any ropes. The work had been done entirely by Sherpa rope-fixing teams over the previous 2 weeks, with each team member spending 8 to 10 hours per day drilling anchors, hauling coils of rope up the face, and testing placements under load. But the claim appeared on his account, where thousands of followers read it, liked it, and left comments praising his thoroughness and technical skill. By morning, the post had been screenshot and shared among Sherpas at Camp 2 through a WhatsApp group used for coordinating logistics. The reaction was immediate and intense. Derek had not merely failed to credit their work, he had explicitly claimed it as his own. To the Sherpas who had spent nearly 2 weeks fixing lines up a face that rises well over 3,000 vertical feet, hauling coils of rope, drilling anchors, and trusting their lives to every placement, the lie represented a fundamental violation. It was not simply disrespectful, It was theft of identity and erasure of accomplishment. What happened next unfolded with a speed that suggested the response had been building for weeks. Around 9 in the morning, Sherpas began descending from higher camps. They came from the Lhotse face, from Camp 3, around 23,500 feet, from advanced positions where they had been pre-positioning equipment for the summit push. They moved down the fixed ropes in groups, unclipping and reclipping past each anchor point with practiced efficiency. Clients and Western guides watched them pass, initially assuming some logistical issue had prompted a temporary evacuation. By 10:30, more than 60 Sherpas had gathered at Camp 2. They congregated near the center of the camp in an open area between expedition clusters, speaking in Nepali with raised voices and animated gestures. Other climbers began to notice the gathering, and word spread quickly that something unusual was happening. Several expedition leaders approached to ask what was happening and were firmly told that the matter concerned only the Sherpa community and the Canadian climber. They were instructed not to involve themselves. Derek became aware of the situation when Dorje arrived at his tent shortly before 11. Dorje's expression was controlled, but his message was direct. The Sherpa community wanted to speak with him about his social media post. Derek needed to come out and address what he had written. Derek responded that he was resting and would talk later. Dorje repeated the request with greater emphasis, explaining that the situation was serious and delay would make things worse. Derek told him to leave and closed the tent vestibule. Within minutes, the gathering of Sherpas moved toward Derek's tent. What had been 60 men became 80, then over 100 more descended from the Lhotse face and arrived from other sections of Camp 2. They formed a loose circle around Derek's tent at a distance of roughly 30 feet, a cordon that effectively isolated him from the rest of the camp. Several Sherpas carried ice axes, not raised as weapons but held in ways that communicated readiness. The atmosphere had shifted from anger to something colder and more organized. The sun beat down on the western CWM, the basin turning into its familiar heat trap, air temperatures climbing toward the upper 20s, with the glare making it feel warmer than it had any right to at 21,300 feet. But the cold radiating from the circle of men had nothing to do with temperature. Melissa Grant, an American guide camped approximately 50 yards away, later described the scene as unlike anything she had witnessed in 12 years of Everest expeditions. The Sherpas were not shouting or threatening violence. They were simply standing in formation, waiting. The silence was more disturbing than the noise would have been. It communicated control and collective purpose. Other climbers had emerged from their tents to watch, standing in small groups at safe distances. At approximately 11:15, Derek emerged from his tent. He appeared confused by the number of people surrounding him and asked what was happening. The response came from multiple Sherpas, simultaneously, delivered in English for his benefit. He had lied about the rope work. He had stolen credit for their labor. He had disrespected their community repeatedly over weeks. They wanted a public acknowledgement and apology. Derek's response escalated the situation. He stated that his post had been misunderstood, that he had not claimed to install all the ropes, only to have checked them for safety. When several Sherpas read the exact text of his caption back to him from their phones, he shifted to arguing that social media posts were personal expression and not subject to their approval. He added that he had paid substantial fees for their services and expected them to fulfill their contracted obligations without harassment. The words hung in the thin air, and the circle of Sherpas contracted slightly, an unconscious collective movement that reduced the space around Derek by several feet. The surrounding circle tightened further. Sherpas moved from 30 feet to 20 feet, then closer. Derek backed against his tent, looking around for support from other climbers or expedition staff. Several Western guides had positioned themselves at the edge of the confrontation, but made no move to intervene. Later interviews revealed their calculation. Derek had created the situation through his own actions, and inserting themselves into a dispute between him and the Sherpa community could damage their own relationships with teams they depended on for future expeditions. Hey, quick reminder that if this kind of in-depth coverage matters to you, subscribing and leaving a like helps support the channel make more videos like this. Now let's get back to the mountain. What happened next remains disputed in detail, but clear in outcome. Derek attempted to retreat back into his tent. Several Sherpas moved forward to prevent this, and physical contact occurred. Derek shoved one Sherpa backward. That Sherpa stumbled but did not fall. Immediately, others surged forward. Hands grabbed Derek's jacket and arms. He was pulled away from his tent and dragged toward the center of the circle. He shouted for help, calling out to other climbers by name, but no one moved. The The violence lasted approximately 90 seconds. Derek was struck in the face and body multiple times. He fell to his knees on the ice. When he tried to stand, he was kicked and fell again. Blood appeared on his face from a cut above his eye. His jacket tore at the shoulder seam. One of his gloves came off and disappeared into the crowd. Then, as quickly as it had started, the physical assault stopped. The Sherpa stepped back, reforming the circle. Derek remained on his knees, gasping in the thin air. His face was swelling on the left side where he had been struck. His breathing was rapid and shallow, each inhalation producing a whistling sound. At 21,300 feet, where oxygen saturation was already critically low, the physical exertion and stress of the beating had pushed his system into acute distress. His hands shook as he pressed one palm against the ice to steady himself. What the Sherpas demanded next was simple. Derek needed to leave the mountain immediately, not after resting, not after discussing with his expedition leader, not after collecting his equipment. Now, they would give him 1 hour to pack essential items and begin descending. If he was still at Camp 2 after that time, they would return and finish what they had started. The threat was delivered calmly, without shouting, which made it more credible. Derek managed to stand, his legs unsteady beneath him. He staggered back toward his tent, supported briefly by a Western climber who had finally approached. Inside his tent, Derek assessed his condition. His face was damaged, but not severely. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, leaving a dark crust across his eyebrow. His ribs ached on his left side, but he could breathe without sharp pain. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, though whether from cold, adrenaline, or altitude was unclear. His oxygen saturation, if measured with the pulse oximeter in his medical kit, would have shown levels well below safe thresholds. His judgment was already compromised by hypoxia, stress, and the cognitive impairment that accompanies extreme altitude. He made the decision that killed him. Rather than descending slowly with support, rather than waiting for assistance from his expedition company, rather than coordinating with other climbers, Derek chose to flee immediately and alone. His thinking was likely influenced by hypoxia, fear, and the ultimatum he had received. In his impaired state, the safest option seemed to be immediate retreat to lower altitude, where he could think more clearly and plan his next moves. He packed a small day pack with minimal supplies, a water bottle, energy bars, his phone, his wallet, and a down jacket. He left most of his equipment in the tent, including his sleeping bag, stove, and additional oxygen bottles. At noon, he started down the western CWM toward Camp 1. The route between Camp 2 and Camp 1 ran roughly 2.5 miles across the western CWM, gentle in angle, but cut through a maze of hidden slots and snow bridges. Under normal conditions with proper pacing, the trek required roughly 2 hours. The glacier was heavily crevassed, and the route wound between ice blocks and across snow bridges marked by wands. Visibility was excellent. Climbers typically traveled this section clipped to a rope team or within sight of others, since a fall into a crevasse without companions meant almost certain death. Derek descended alone, moving faster than his body could sustain at that altitude. His oxygen saturation continued to drop with exertion. His coordination deteriorated as his brain struggled to function on inadequate oxygen. His vision narrowed, reducing his peripheral awareness. His thoughts became fragmented and difficult to hold. He fixated on distance and speed, checking his watch repeatedly, trying to calculate how long it would take to reach safety. Around 12:40, approximately 1 mile below Camp 2, he stepped onto a snow bridge that appeared solid but had been weakened by afternoon warming. The surface temperature had risen into the teens, and the snow that had been frozen solid at dawn was now soft and unstable. The bridge collapsed beneath his weight without warning. One moment, he was walking on what appeared to be solid ground. The next moment, he was falling through empty air. Derek fell 23 feet into a crevasse before his body wedged between the narrowing walls of blue ice. The impact was catastrophic. His left femur was fractured mid-shaft, the bone breaking cleanly under the force of deceleration. Several vertebrae in his lower spine cracked, though the spinal cord remained intact. His head struck the ice wall, opening a gash across his scalp and leaving him momentarily unconscious. He remained wedged between the crevasse walls, his body held in place by friction and the narrowing slot that prevented him from falling deeper. When consciousness returned, Derek could not move. His broken leg sent waves of pain through his body with every attempted motion. His back would not respond to commands. His arms were pinned against the ice walls in positions that allowed minimal range of movement. Above him, he could see the ragged opening through which he had fallen, a slash of bright sky perhaps 15 feet overhead. His day pack, which had been torn from his back during the fall, lay on a ledge 12 feet above him. visible but completely unreachable. The pack contained his radio and emergency beacon. He tried to shout, but the thin air in his damaged body produced only weak sounds. The temperature inside the crevasse was well below zero, insulated from direct sunlight. Derek was dressed for active movement, not for lying motionless on ice. His body began losing heat immediately, conducted away through contact with surfaces that existed at temperatures far below freezing. He was discovered 3 hours later by a pair of Sherpas descending from Camp 2 with equipment. They spotted his pack on the ledge, investigated, and found him wedged in the crevasse below. They attempted to communicate, but received no coherent response. Derek was hypothermic and in hemorrhagic shock, skin waxy, breathing shallow, awareness flickering in and out as his body tried to compensate for blood loss and cold. His core temperature had dropped into the low 90s, and his body had begun shutting down non-essential functions to preserve heat for vital organs. A rescue operation formed in minutes, but the geometry made everything slow. The crevasse narrowed where Derek was wedged, too tight for 2 people to work side by side, and too unstable to risk forcing him downward. 6 Sherpas drilled ice screws into hard blue ice above the lip, equalized anchors, and built a compact pulley. One rescuer was lowered just far enough to reach Derek's chest and shoulders, working by feel in the confined slot, to thread webbing high under his arms. Then the team hauled in short, controlled increments, stop, reset, haul, his body scraping ice as they fought the pinch points all the way to daylight. By the time they brought him to the surface, his core temperature had dropped to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and he was no longer responsive to stimuli. Derek Holden was carried to Camp 1 above the icefall and staged for evacuation while the light held. When conditions allowed, a helicopter extracted him from lower on the route where aircraft performance was safer and flew him to Kathmandu for emergency surgery. He died during surgery shortly after midnight on May 16th. The official cause of death was listed as traumatic injuries, complicated by severe hypothermia and cerebral edema. He was 38 years old. The incident prompted investigations by Nepalese authorities and climbing organizations. Witness statements were collected, but no charges were filed. Reviews concluded that Derek's death resulted from his decision to descend alone while injured and impaired by altitude, not from the confrontation itself. Within the mountaineering community, it became known simply as the Camp 2 incident, discussed in forums and cited in briefings as a reminder of how quickly judgment can fail at altitude. The Sherpas returned to work within days. The season moved on, and Everest filled again with climbers chasing the same summit Derek never reached. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.